Hey everyone, today I'm going to do a follow-up video on the mortality based on vaccination status using the UK data that was available for about 2 years. We have this data that UK tracked, and I did a video recently, not long ago, discussing this, where the authors of the publication looked at all-cause mortality, so any cause of death based on vaccine status. And today we're going to explore another paper by another group of scientists. I believe the first one was maybe from Italy. These guys, I think, might be from Germany. And they analyzed the data, same data, they analyzed it slightly similar. And as a consequence, we're going to learn about new concepts. And I will also admit that perhaps also with your urging, there was a lot of commentary on the first video. Yes, perhaps my own opinion in terms of the data will be changing. I'll get to all of this. And today we're going to look at the mortality that excludes COVID, as well as mortality that is strictly just COVID related, okay? My name is Dr. Mikhail Rashik of Merogenomics. And let's begin. So this data, first we're going to look at the data the authors provide. They analyze it slightly differently. Maybe let me start with that. They analyze it by looking at number of deaths, whether you are non-vaccinated individual or you had 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 shots of COVID-19 vaccines. I'll call it vaccines. I know a lot of you don't like that term because it no longer corresponds to the type of vaccines that people used to obtain in their childhood long time ago, which actually protected you from infection. But besides the point, you know what we're talking about. And they looked at it in terms of number of deaths per 100,000 individuals. I actually really like this type of comparison more so than what we did in the previous video, because it's easier to compare apples to apples, and it really gives you appropriate picture in terms of what was happening to who and how. So I just like this type of comparison better. We'll talk about the previous comparison in a moment as well. So the very first figure they showed in the paper is strictly non-vaccinated people, how they were dying for any reason besides COVID, okay? So remember the previous paper, I strictly focused on COVID-related deaths. So, sorry, all deaths, whether that included COVID and non-COVID deaths. Those previous authors, the Italian group of scientists, they also analyzed all mortality excluding COVID, but I did not analyze that information in that video. These guys only did all deaths except COVID, and then they did COVID separately. They did not combine them. So the very first figure shows you all deaths for non-vaccinated individuals except COVID. And let's break those numbers down. They broke it down by age, and this shows you basically how people die in different age groups. So for 18-year-olds to all the way to 30-year-olds, so the breakdowns is the same as in the previous video. This was about 20 to 70 people were dying out of 100,000, okay? You move on to the 40-year-olds, that was 100 to, say, 300 people out of 100,000. You move on to 50-year-olds, and there was 350 to 750 people out of 100,000 were dying for any cause besides COVID. And then you move on to 60-year-olds, and that was those are approximate numbers, obviously. Those about 900 to 2,000, I think maybe 450. And then you move on to 7-year-olds, and this was 2,650 to 5,850 people were dying for every 100,000 people in that age bracket. And then 80-year-olds, so see, now we're crossing 5% death rate. Now you're going to say 80-year-olds and 80-year-olds, the death rate was, for anything besides COVID, was 5,750 to 13,750 for every 100,000 individuals in that age bracket. And then the worst one was, of course, not surprisingly, 90-year-olds, and that was 16,000, let's say 450 to 30,000, 250 people for every 100,000 people in that age group. So you can see, of course, the older you get, the more likely you are going to die for any reason, for any cause. So that makes sense. Why did I tell you all of this? Because in the next figure, the most important figure, in my opinion, in the paper, they combine all of this. So before I show you the figure, let's just talk about this a little bit. So now we're going to look at all ages. It doesn't matter what age group it is. We're just going to look how people were dying in terms of non-vaccinated, all people versus people who had 1 shot, 2 shots, and so on. So for those who were non-vaccinated, all ages, if you combine everything what I just told you into one statistic, that turned out to be people were dying anywhere between, for any reason besides COVID, they were dying around 900 to 950 throughout this 26-month period of study that we have this data available for, because that's it. We have this data only available from, let's say, I think it's April 2021 to, like, I think would be May 2023 or something like that. And whoop, a branch hit my camera. Come back. No, wrong way. So, and so that's the non-vaccinated. And now we're going to compare, and that in the graph is shown in green. Previously, in the previous video, the way we saw this, they made it flat, because in the previous video, they compared it as a ratio to non-vaccinated, how all other vaccine recipients were compared to non-vaccinated as a ratio. So they showed this ratio risk group. I like this one better. They just show how everyone was dying throughout this time period. It's a green line. And the first one we're going to look at is those who had 1 shot. And for whatever reason, 1 shot was very deadly. And they show that on average throughout this time span, not on average, throughout this time span, it ranged between additional approximately, I think it was maybe 600 deaths to all the way to 4,800 extra deaths for those who had 1 shot of any COVID-19 vaccine in comparison to those who were not vaccinated at all. All right, so 1 shot was the worst. And we discussed that in a previous video. It was the same concept. And we're now going to move to the two shots. And this is an interesting one. When it came to 2 shots, for the first 7 months of those who took the 2 shots, they were dying less frequently and substantially less frequently than those who were non-vaccinated. It's the same trend I discussed in a previous video. I mentioned that there was this mysterious protection, and I'll talk about this in a second as well. And you see this, that until I think it was April 2021, people were, those who had 2 shots of COVID-19 vaccines were dying less frequently than non-vaccinated for any reason except COVID. And this amounted to perhaps in that time period between minus 100 fewer deaths in comparison to non-vaccinated, to all the way to 1,250 fewer deaths per 100,000 individuals. Because remember, that's our denominator for all the numbers I'm talking about. And then May 2021, it reversed and it became worse, and a lot worse. So there was this early protection, and then it disappeared. And then not only it was worse than the protection before, so then people were dying. The range was somewhere between plus 350 extra deaths all the way to 1,500 extra deaths for those who were vaccinated with 2 shots in comparison to non-vaccinated per 100,000 people. So there's this flip that goes on. Same thing with 3 shots, and with 3 shots there was 6 months protection. Originally, in the first 6 months, people who had 3 shots were dying less frequently than non-vaccinated, and that range anywhere between fewer than 70 deaths to all the way to, I believe, 700 fewer deaths. So the protection wasn't as powerful as what we observed with 2 shots. But then again, it flipped. The protection lasted all the way till, I believe, April 22nd, 2022, and then in May Am I getting that right? And I think May 2022, that flipped. So the previous protection I for 2 shots, I think I could give you wrong date. It was till October 2021, November 2021, there was that flip. For 3 shots, because 3 shots became available later, booster became available later, that flip was in May 2022. And again, people were dying now more frequently than non-vaccinated. And again, it was worse than the protection before. And that was, people were dying anywhere between plus 250 people all the way to maybe like something like 800, 850 extra people per month for the duration of the study. And the 4th shots is the weirdest. The 4th shot has the most variable data. In this data set, the first approximately 7-8 months, it was really bad. People were dying a lot more than non-vaccinated, and that ranged anywhere between extra 700 to extra 1,250 people per 100,000 individuals than non-vaccinated, and only then did it go either equivalent to non-vaccinated or a little bit fewer people dying than the non-vaccinated. And then we'll see in a moment how, if you start dividing into different age groups, how it's all over the board. So, but before I go on, what does it mean? It's very bizarre and mysterious. So here, what we see is this protection, and this is what I was talking about in the previous video, that there was this protection, but then the question is, what's up with this one-time vaccine, right? Because it turned out to be so deadly. The authors of this paper, in the end, mention that for all the COVID protection that the vaccines granted, was not worth it for all the deaths that appear to have been caused if you start looking at the data the way, because how many people died with vaccine more so in comparison to the non-vaccinated. So the risk-benefit analysis does not seem to favor vaccines based on looking at this data the way they were looking at it. So what's going on? But remember, you could say, who cares about this protection with 2 shots or 3 shots if your chances of survival with the first shot was lower than if you were never vaccinated in the first place, right? And that is a valid argument. The only problem here is that, remember, this is UK data, and UK data had both the AstraZeneca shot, which was, I believe, was only 1 shot. I never really studied AstraZeneca that much. It was quickly removed from use. And then, but they also had the mRNA shots, of course, the 2 times, 3 times, and so on. That can include the mRNA shots. And because the data is not divided per vaccine, we don't know which of the type of vaccines was causing all that dramatic increase in death after the first shot. So perhaps the mRNA shots were providing temporary protection both with the first and second shot, and only it was the other type of vaccine that might have been causing all these problems. Because we don't know that fully, we can't really tell whether there was a beneficial protection or not. But if my mRNA shots did not cause this elevated death rate after 1 shot, then you can see there might have been a very short-lived, only a few months benefit against all-cause mortality. And irrespective of whether that's the case or not, and let's ignore the 1 times, my question is, what was that? What caused this beneficial protection that we see with this 2 shots and 3 shots, where suddenly for just those few months people were dying less than non-vaccinated for any reason? What was it immunologically or whatever happened inside the body that provided this result? Because I would be very curious to know what it is. To me, it seems like perhaps something was induced and then we ran out of it, and that protection just disappeared because we used up something, like, let's say, a type of, I'm just going to make up stuff just for the sake of analysis or comparison. Maybe we run up a certain type of immune cell, right? Or component. Or maybe it waned and it needed reboosting, and then we just needed addition of it. But the reason why I'm interested in this, because I think this is something would be very worthwhile to know what that was, in case we could figure out how to induce it, not necessarily with vaccines, with some other intervention, and know how to extend our lifespan. So that part I'm very, very curious. I hope there will be more digging into this. I won't be surprised if there might not be, simply because this is a bit of a data that no one wants to really look at, because no one wants to shed bad light on vaccines, and clearly this type of data does shine bad light on the COVID-19 vaccines. All right, they also obviously looked at the COVID deaths as well, as I mentioned, and for COVID deaths, they mentioned that all vaccines, whether it was 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, if you look at all age groups, it did protect against COVID better. So those who had shots fared better in terms of deaths from COVID than non-vaccinated. So non-vaccinated, the range of death was maybe between 50 to 650 people per 100,000 individuals, all right? And then for those who were vaccinated, that protection ranged anywhere between, I believe it was maybe -2 to all the way to -600, something like that. So that was the protection of the vaccines. So this is why the authors mentioned that protection in terms of numbers saved by vaccines from COVID was lower than the numbers lost, apparently, according to this data, by the vaccines. And a lot of you mentioned about this one-time shot perhaps being the problem in the first place. One of the reasons why we're seeing this many deaths is because those who were not compatible with the vaccine, they were dying just simply after the first shot. And this is why after the second, third shot, we're not seeing as many deaths, because the first shot took out so many people. And the authors also mentioned something to that extent, that one-time shot was really, really bad. And this is where we need to investigate this a lot more in order to understand what is going on before we use this type of technology again for this very purpose, for this type of virus. And I think that's fair. Then they divided into different age groups, and let's go over these really quick as well. So 18 to 30-year-olds, for all death rates that did not include COVID, those who had one shot, 22 months out of 26 months of the study period, they had higher death rate than non-vaccinated. Now, if you took 2 shots, then for 2 shots, 22 months out of 26, they had lower death rates than non-vaccinated. 3 shots, all 19 months for that age group, those people had lower death rate than non-vaccinated. And 4th shot was diabolical. It was for the 13 months that this age group, those who were taking 4th shot, and you looked at the mortality was substantially higher than non-vaccinated. So script flips depending on which shot was being taken in this age group. Now, in terms of COVID deaths, they mentioned that COVID deaths, all vaccines protected this age group from COVID in comparison to non-vaccinated, but their protection was incredibly minimal. It ranged from -0.5 to -9, or fewer than 9 individuals per 100,000 people in terms of dying from COVID if you had a vaccine than not, if you were non-vaccinated. So very negligible protection, but look how dangerous it potentially was to some of these individuals in terms of vaccine. But let's move on to the next one, 40-year-olds. Here, 23 out of 26 months, those who had 1 shots, the death rate was higher in comparison to non-vaccinated. Same story, we're gonna see same story for one shot throughout this entire study. Those who had 2 shots, 22 months out of 26, they had lower death rate than non-vaccinated. In terms of 3 shots, again, now 20 months, all of them were lower death rates than non-vaccinated. And then 4 shots, again, all 13 months, those who had 4 shots, the death rates, mortality for all death except COVID was higher for those who were vaccinated than non-vaccinated. So again, depending on which shot it is, the death rates can either be above or below non-vaccinated. In terms of COVID, any vaccine protected from COVID death, but now things change. When only till Omicron era. And once Omicron started to rule the world, things changed and that protection was no longer there. It was equivalent. So it disappeared. Let's move on to 50-year-olds. When it comes to 50-year-olds, again, 23 out of 26 months, the death rate was higher for one-time shot. For 2 shots, now things change here a bit. 13 months out of 26 was lower, and then the rest, and the last 10 months was equivalent. So you see the pattern already starts to change. 3 times shots, it was still all lower, I believe, for the, how many months? I think it was 20 months. All of those were still lower death rate in comparison to non-vaccinated. But 4 shots, here now, the first 7 months were substantially higher, and then subsequent 7 months was lower. All right, so it's a bit different. For COVID deaths, same story as for the 40-year-olds. Those who had any vaccine were protected from COVID death, but only till Omicron. And once Omicron came around, it was basically the same. Then let's move on to the 60-year-olds. Now for the one-time shot, I believe it was 24 months now out of 26 that those who took 1 shot, the mortality was higher than non-vaccinated. For 2-time shots, now this script flips here. 18 out of 26 months, the mortality was higher than non-vaccinated, okay? For 3-time shots, also the script starts to flip here. 13 months, the death rate was lower. Then afterwards, it was similar. So death rate was lower than non-vaccinated, then it was similar. And 4-time shots, first 7 months, it was higher, and then next 7 months, it was lower, the non-death rate for all deaths except COVID than the non-vaccinated. And when it came to COVID deaths, again, all vaccines protected against COVID till Omicron showed up, with an exception of first one dose that did not seem to provide that protection as what we've seen with younger cohorts, okay? 70-year-olds, 1 shot, now 25 months out of 26, mortality was always higher for those who took 1 shot over those who were never vaccinated. For 2 shots, it was 19 months out of 26. Mortality was higher for vaccinated with 2 shots over non-vaccinated. 3 shots, 13 months, the mortality was higher out of, believe it was 20 months, than a non-vaccinated. So you can see the script is the older you get, the worse it all seems to be. And then for the 4-time shot, the very first month was substantially higher. Then the next 4 months was, I believe, equivalent. And then it seems to be a little bit lower after that. When it comes to just COVID deaths, again, same idea. Vaccination, all vaccinations protected you from COVID death until Omicron showed up, and Omicron made it even Steven for everyone. All right, let's 2 more groups. 80-year-olds, the first shot every single month throughout the study. If you had 1 shot, the mortality was higher for 80-year-olds for those who had 1 shot as compared to non-vaccinated. For 2 shots, the mortality was higher 19 months out of 26 in comparison to non-vaccinated. All right, 3 shots, the mortality was higher 14 months out of, I believe it was 20 for those who had 3 shots in comparison to non-vaccinated. And then 4 shots, the first 4 months, it was higher than 3 months. It was, I think, maybe similar, lower, and then it was similar. And then when it comes to COVID deaths, now the protection again was there for the first period, and then when Omicron showed up, it started to be very similar once again. And then let's move on, except when Omicron showed up, then that was really bad for 1 and 2 shots, okay? So for whatever reason, that protection was not there. So basically throughout that period, if you were vaccinated and you're in your 80s, you were very similar to if you were non-vaccinated. At times you were lower and you were protected, but there was also one period, that winter when January 22nd, it was really bad for the 1 times and 2 shots and 2 times vaccinated only, for in terms of deaths. And the last group, 90-year-olds, 25 out of 26 months for one shot, the mortality was higher than people who were not vaccinated. When it comes to 2 shots, I believe it was 21 out of 26 months, the mortality was higher for those who were vaccinated versus non-vaccinated. When it comes to 3 shots, again, it was 14 months out of 20 where the mortality was higher in the vaccinated than non-vaccinated. And in a four shots, I can't remember that one very well. I think there was maybe higher for the first 3 months, and then it was either even or a bit lower for the rest of the period. 4 shot was all over, so I can't really remember. But when it comes to COVID as well, just COVID related deaths, same idea as what I just told you with the 80-year-olds. If you were vaccinated, the death rate for COVID was very similar to non-vaccinated, only at times it was lower, and with exception of that January 22nd when Omicron showed up, and it was, again, those who had 1 or 2 shots, it was really bad for those individuals in that age bracket. So that's all of the data. Now we looked at this data from 3 different angles: all-cause mortality, mortality excluding COVID, and now also COVID deaths. And overall, the authors saying this was not good. The vaccines do not look good based on this data, and as a consequence, they call for deeper analysis by authorities all over the world, basically, in terms of looking whether we should be employing such strategy again for this type of virus in the future. Now, what they said was also very interesting. They said the peaks of deaths that occurred in especially 70-year-olds, 80-year-olds, and 90-year-olds coincided with when the people were eligible to get vaccines for the one-time shot. So when the vaccines first became eligible for these different age groups, of course, the oldest were the 90-year-olds were the first. It was maybe May 2021. Then I can't remember the periods, but each age group had a specific date when they were eligible for getting a shot, and the death rates, they claim, happened to coincide with when the vaccine shots became available for different age groups. And they claim this is another potential evidence that suggests that perhaps the shots might not be as safe as we thought they might be, and this again should be investigated. All right, we probably covered this topic to death, so I'm gonna wrap it up right here. I'm just gonna say, please like, please share, please subscribe if you haven't already, and if you want to continue listening to this topic. A lot of you complained in the last video, and I got this paper from few of you, and I wanted to study it immediately, and I will admit that I did change my tune a little bit from what I read last time, or what I was telling you last time, because indeed, if this one-time shot was so deadly, then who cares about the protection that the 2 times or 3 times vaccine, 3 times shots might provide, if your ability to survive 1 times the first shot is worse than if you never got vaccinated and got infected? Then it makes no sense. But I still would be curious to know if we could split that data based on vaccine type, whether perhaps there is a benefit for one type of vaccine versus another. Please also check out my Patreon account. And there is some free stuff there and some stuff that is paid stuff. And also, I always say, those who are supporting patrons, you also get to decide what content makes it to YouTube, because not all of my content ends up on YouTube in the end. All right, I'm gonna wrap it up here. I knew it was gonna be a longer video because of the complexity of this information, and I'll see you guys in the future. Bye everyone.